Welcome to Northwest Tech Show, the show where we talk about technology and how it affects our lives and how a better understanding of it can maybe make it affect our lives in better ways. We're going to start off the show, as we like to do, with a little bit of Creative Commons content to kick off the themes.
This is Twit. Huawei, or as many people call it, Huawei. I always love it when I hear on people, oh, this Chinese company, Huawei. The president has signed an executive order declaring a national emergency. He likes to do that, and I don't know why it's a national emergency, but suddenly it is, prohibiting U.S. companies from using telecom services that are solely owned, controlled, or directed by a foreign adversary, which includes Huawei. Huawei's been in the spotlight since 2012, I think, when the Department of Commerce said, be careful with Huawei, ZTE, and Xiaomi. They're all Chinese companies. People have pointed to the ownership of Huawei. It seems no one can really be sure who owns it. Huawei says we're owned by our employees, but without much proof. And certainly,
well, also in Huawei's case, the founder was in the People's Liberation Army. So yeah. the implication is that he still has ties to the PLA. And I think also that's part of the story too. So okay, I go ahead and finish the intro, and then I'll jump in.
No. I think that's enough. I think we've been talking about this for a while. My position on this is, I'm a little on the fence because it does seem like it's part of a political, it's part of the Chinese tariffs, the kind of the political tenor.
So,
and we've never seen evidence that Huawei is doing anything. Huawei says we've never done anything. Show us the proof.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So, I mentioned you mentioned that we're doing the weekend episodes now. And so last weekend I had Dexter Tillian on, who's a telecoms analyst, I think in London, because I've been reading these headlines. I'm like, so what is this Huawei? I'd never heard of them. And now all of a sudden, there's a huge trade war that they're at the center of. And the three things that I learned were, A, like you just said, one of the reasons that other countries are not willing to ban Huawei is because, and even the British and the Germans have said this apparently straight up, like if there is intelligence that Huawei is spying and is too close to the Chinese government, the United States government has not shown us that. Like maybe we'd be willing to get on board with this banning, but we haven't seen the proof. And again, I'm not an expert in this, and Dexter is more than I am, and he said, yes, as far as I know, there is no smoking gun. Now, that doesn't mean if there was some sort of a conflict or a war, maybe China wouldn't lean on Huawei and be like, maybe shut this or that down. But then the U.S. has been able to do that for years. So is part of this just somebody else can do the thing that it was implicit that we could always do? But the two things, aside from that there's no actual proof that anyone seems to know of that there are these close connections. The second thing is how come they're the only ones basically that can do 5G, and they're not. There's also
Ericsson does it, Nokia does it, Samsung does it, but
the problem is
number one is Huawei by far.
They're number one. They have the most 5G patents. And then what happened is over the last 10 years or so, it's classic. They come in and they do it cheaper and better. So if you're Vietnam, if you're India, if you're Argentina, and you got to dial up a national 5G network, not only is the company that will do it for you the best Huawei, it's also the cheapest. So if the U.S. leans on all these other countries like they're trying to do to say, no, don't use them, it doesn't make economic sense. And then the third thing was that, I said, well, how come they're the only ones left standing? Like, and Dexter said, well, it's like whatever became of Motorola, whatever became of Lucent, Alcatel. He's like, yeah, it's just over the last 20 years, everything has shifted to where, while no one was paying attention, this Chinese company came up from below and can now is the best at doing the technology that is, as everyone tells us, the key to the next generation of tech.
I should also point out, this is going to be a big on the other hand segment, that much of Huawei's 5G switching gear is software bound. And so when it was just hardware, you could look at it and say, well, this is okay, it's not phoning home. But once it's software and it's getting regular updates, anything could happen. And if you're a Chinese company, I wonder how much freedom, even if you're not owned by the Chinese government, I wonder how much freedom you have if the Chinese government came to Huawei and said, okay, we'd like you to put this in your firmware. Could they say no? But I notice we don't say, it's just Huawei. We don't say ZTE. We don't say Xiaomi. We don't,
OnePlus.
OnePlus.
Yeah.
And most of our gear is made in China, so I'm sure Foxconn would have the same problem if the Chinese government said, hey.
According to Dexter, it is the way that Huawei in the late 80s, early 90s, I think that's the timeline, got off the ground is their first contract was with the PLA. So in the late 80s, early 90s. People's Liberation Army. Yes. So when the Chinese army says we need our own national network, telecoms network for security purposes,
right.
It's Huawei that gets that contract and delivers. And then there have been these whispers behind the scenes that why does Huawei have apparently this access to unlimited capital in certain instances to win certain contracts, and so people are assuming that then that's because
why do you think Chinese it's so government. Cheap?
Right.
Well, the other shoe dropped today because Google, according to Reuters, and this is not yet confirmed, at least not as of press time, as if we had presses, as of press time, but apparently Reuters says Google has suspended business with Huawei, will no longer update Android phones made by Huawei. That's not a concern inside China because, of course, Google doesn't do business in China, so those phones are not, they're open source Android, but they're not using Google apps. And furthermore, Huawei phones will lose Google apps, Google services, including the Play Store and YouTube apps. That is a big penalty. And by the way, the Huawei phones are beloved in the United States. You can't buy them, from a phone company, but people like Paul Thurrott of Windows Weekly, he loves his Huawei.
I was just going to make that point. I mean, when about a year and a half ago, when Huawei took the stage at CES and was supposed to have this great AT&T deal to announce, they didn't. And then Richard Yu, their consumer business group executive, sort of went off script and said, we think this is really bad because U.S. consumers don't have access to the best choice, which at the time was their Mate 10 Pro they were announcing.
They were pissed because basically it was the United States government that went to AT&T and said, it would be foolish of you to sell this phone. And so they pulled out.
And AT&T exhibiting its usual, I forgot what the NSA memo said. It's unusual cooperativeness or something. Was like, oh yeah, okay, fine. But my thing is, at the time,
count on them to be cooperative usually.
Yeah. Well, at the time I was like, well, the Mate 10 Pro is fine, but I don't think it's the big loss to U.S. consumers that Huawei said it was. And then what they did over the next year was build two of the most impressive and innovative from a hardware standpoint smartphones I had ever used. And now, it's the cameras, from the cameras to the reverse wireless charging that we saw Samsung do, to the weird material finishes. They're wonderful phones. And now to see this develop is really a shame, because if it goes through, they won't even work if you import them, or they won't work.
Well, no one will want an Android phone that has no Google services on it.
Exactly.
That's a non-starter. Yeah, these phones have Leica cameras in them. They have 4,000 milliamp hour batteries. I have a P20, which I guess I won't use anymore. Even more to the point, no more security updates. It means you're really, this is not a phone to buy. We can't recommend this phone.
But that's the other point. They actually haven't, as far as I can tell, brought the full hammer down yet, where a U.S. company cannot do business. Remember, they did that with ZTE for a while, and then dialed it back. Was it ZTE? Anyway.
Yeah, it was.
But forget about the software, Leo. Like they won't be able to manufacture their phones. And there's articles that have come out about, Huawei's been stockpiling components and stuff like that. But if they can't do business with U.S. component providers, like they can't manufacture a modern smartphone. It's almost the reverse of what we were saying. Like you can't do a 5G network without Huawei.
Huawei says in anticipation of this, they've been stockpiling American parts. but others are unconvinced. The head of Huawei's HiSilicon chip division Friday shrugged off concerns about disruptions to supply, saying it has long been preparing for this kind of extreme scenario. They will aim to be technologically self-reliant going forward. Industry experts say that's going to be a stretch. It's hard to... Isn't that funny? If you ask somebody, what do you think the key components for the Huawei phone are? Where do they come from? You wouldn't say U.S., but that's what's different about the world today. It isn't just a Chinese phone. Nothing. Your car is not just a German car or a Japanese car. It's a global economy. So, if there's a security issue, and you could certainly see that it might be prudent to say, well, let's not build our national infrastructure, particularly critical infrastructure, on products from a Chinese company that could at any point pull the plug.
But then they should state that it might not be smart, not that they, believe that there's something nefarious that's happening, and the timing of taking such a big competitor out of the market.
Isn't, though, that the government's job? If they see a cyber, not that they do that job in other cases, but if they see a cyber threat, as long as it's not Russia.
If they see a cyber threat, they should state that this is what the cyber threat is. And if it's that they think that this would just be safer, they should be honest and transparent and say, we just think this would be a better way to make sure that it's all American made so that we have control over that. The thing is, saying there's a threat, then giving no proof and really creating, again, like you hear something enough, you believe that it's true without any proof that's kind of behind it. That makes us think twice even about what the government then tells us.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at twit.tv. That was This Week in Tech 719, United States versus Huawei. I'm Dave Duncan, and I'm joined by Nate Darnell, who's going to try an alternate pronunciation. Hey, Nate.
I was just trying to pronounce my own name. No, it's all good.
Now we've got a national emergency, again, based on nothing. Maybe a resentment that the H company is moving into the lead technologically, that has the most advanced 5G equipment for the lowest cost at the dawn of the 5G rollout. All of a sudden, let's ban them. So I think this may be an example of a short-term move with long-term bad consequences. I think it's been pretty good to have, for the United States, I think it's been pretty good to have the whole world smartphone dependent on an American company, really. That's not with my global fairness hat, but with my American hat on. It's like, that's a pretty handy position to be in. And now we're saying, okay, well, please go off the American standard and, provide an alternative to everyone else who's kind of resented being under the American standard for a long time. They're going to make it easy. And, the leading Chinese company, I'm sure with, politically motivated financial backing of the Chinese government, just as a global positioning thing, it's like, oh yeah, let's take global leadership in telecommunications. That could come in handy.
Well, I think that they can become self-reliant. It's not going to be an easy trip for them. But look, Russia has largely done that, correct?
I don't know. I don't really think of any Russian company names when I think of global leadership.
No, but here's my point: is that Russia can become. I didn't say they were going to become global leaders.
Oh, but being independent.
Can they be independent? Russia's been independent for a long time.
They've experimented with shutting down the internet to and seeing what they can just do locally.
They've experimented with all kinds of things. It doesn't mean that they do it kindly. It just means that they have overriding political authority based on their government structure to force the citizens into doing things a specific way or to settling for specific circumstances if they so choose.
Yeah, that's one of the things that came out of the book on Code is Law, Lawrence Lessig, is that the way that's the sort of the guiding forces in the world are what the technology will let you do, what the norms say are proper, what the market says to do. But what the code allows is one of the big ones. So if you're in charge of the code, that gives you a lot of sway domestically and internationally, potentially. But just in terms of being able to govern the lives of their own citizens, taking control, having independence from outside technologies, or at least having an alternative to them, is pretty important. The more totalitarian you believe in, the less you want to have global interactions in how everything works, because then you don't have control.
Right. But my point is that although it would be difficult for China to fly completely independently, technologically, that is, it's not impossible.
No, it's a little bit of a setback for everybody, but
right. And so the argument that they're not going to do it, I think is not true. If you push them enough, they will. And therein lies the challenge. Where does Apple get most of its parts from? Right?
Definitely. I was in no way saying that they wouldn't do it. I mean, of course they will.
So
I think it's going to be difficult. Yeah. It's going to be a little bit of a setback. There's probably going to be some drops in functionality and reliability, because recreating, well-known chips, idiosyncratic behavior and all, for like over a decade, that's hard to just roll out something fresh that, is going to fill that niche.
Right. I guess my primary concern is that the current strategy that the U.S. government is using is the hardline approach, which is no, we're not going to budge unless you budge. Maybe that's needed.
Well, I'm not even sure what budge means in this case.
Nor am I. But my point being is that the leadership in China has basically done the same thing, which is they said, no, we're not going to entertain this, and we're batting, we're bolting down the hatches with the expectation and digging in with the expectation that if we have to go to digital warfare, we will. And so, I think sometimes people with big egos, without the requisite skill set to truly understand the scope of what they're proposing,
they just do stuff.
They end up getting themselves and other people knee deep into stuff that they're not prepared to dig out of.
Yeah. Well, we've seen the power of technological leadership in things like and how it's not infallible, but there was pushes to say things like, oh, you can't bring your company, or your company will be booted out of our country. If it's already there, or it will not be allowed in unless you do a special version of your technology that eliminates some of the security features or something. And early on, some of the big companies were like, okay, and that country just didn't have that. And often they bowed under that pressure from their citizens of, we want the good stuff, and you're saying we can't have it because it's not, it's not full Swiss cheese. The security isn't Swiss cheesed enough for your liking, but then, the companies always come creeping back, and it's like, well, maybe we'll play ball. And like, Google was going to do first they were saying, well, we're not going to do a corrupt version of our search, that censors things and, tells you what people search for and things like that. And then they kind of came crawling back and go, well, maybe we will. And then the employees of the company, who had unusual amount of leverage because there's a shortage of the really good programmers, and there's just so many companies vying for them that they could literally walk out, get a job the next day, and severely wound Google by their absence. So they're like, okay, I guess we won't do that. So there's still got all these weird struggles going on at so many levels, and then we come in with just like this very crude tool of, oh, we're just going to ban it, and it's really an invitation to do the same thing to our stuff, right? Because American technology is all over the place. We've certainly gotten a lot of documentation for Snowden that the NSA, et cetera, isn't shy about coming in and corrupting these products and putting their own little back doors in it. And but we're pitching a fit that anyone else doing the same thing is crime against humanity. And it's just, granted, our our kind of abuse of our population is different than the way the other country abuses their population, but it's certainly aspiring to go to the same place, seemingly.
I'm chuckling because it's so true. I mean, all these governments are abusing people, and they just have slightly different approaches to doing it.
Yeah, and they're very, sanctimoniously standing up and saying, "Well, we're good, but the other guy," it's not too convincing an act. One of the things that was interesting was, I think since this video clip happened, there was a 90-day temporary extension. So companies were allowed to continue their contracts for 90 days. And I guess there was reference to in the past when a similar ban happened against another company that they just did perpetual 90-day extensions until they worked everything out and went back to taking them off the list of companies that you can't do business with as an American company. So there was that. There was also some speculation of, well, what they were saying right now is that they just fall back to the version of Android that's has under the Apache license that anyone can use. And there was some speculation of, well, the Apache license is still a license, and therefore it's a contract, and you can't have contracts with guys that are on the list. And I don't. I'm a little skeptical of that one. I'll have to wait and see someone authoritatively come out as a lawyer, because I think the kind of contracts you're banned from doing are the ones where you actually interact with someone. It's like you specifically have an agreement. If you just have an open contract that says anyone can use this, I don't think you get to say implicitly that that doesn't apply to countries that are on the ban list, because that's not in the contract, And if you want to go against, you couldn't prosecute the company, I think, for that, just saying, well, I didn't do a contract with them. I just said anyone could use it. So it wasn't specifically with them, which is, I think, the only thing that you could really legally say was applicable to the ban. So I think that's still in the pipe, that they'll just use Android without the Google services, which are a proprietary extension to the base Android layer, and the and the automatic updates from Google. Although I'm sure the Android open source project gets up security updates too, and so just be some other company would have to step in and be the one who actually implemented those and supported those updates, whether it was this company or even the government, since it's kind of the problems were happening at a governmental level. Maybe they could be a case to made for the Chinese government to step in and say, oh yeah, we'll take care of the security updates. I'm sure they'd love to do that, especially since it means they could do an update that had security holes in it, and there back doors in it any time they wanted to. What government wouldn't want to do that? Motorola. So did you kind of snickered that offline when we were doing that?
Because it's true. Well, I haven't. I mean, one of my first phones was a Motorola flip phone.
Yeah.
Right.
And they put out indestructible phones. Yeah.
Well, and keep in mind that they really pioneered the entire wireless, the entire cell phone market. I mean, it was their technology that actually allowed the whole wireless infrastructure to be developed.
Yeah, they were doing police radio, most reliable police radio before that.
And then what happened to them? Like as I was thinking about that, I was like, I haven't heard about Motorola in like 5 or 6 years. I know that they were acquired by Google. That's my recollection.
I think, they rated for their patents, I think, is what happened.
Well, no doubt. But I mean, I just remember hearing that, and then 5 years ago, and then boom, Motorola's gone.
For a long time, patents weren't really a big deal. And then all of a sudden, people started, beating up Google left and right with the patents. And then they go, oh, okay, I guess we need a big patent portfolio too. They started buying up these companies that had big patent portfolios but weren't necessarily doing well otherwise, and all of a sudden that sort of died down, because then it becomes mutual annihilation, right? It's like, if I have major patents and you have major patents, then it's in our best interest not to to go after each other. It's like, okay, we'll do a swap. I get to use your patents and you get to use my patents, and we don't call the lawyers anymore on that. Huawei did have a deal in the works with AT&T, which was broken off on announcement of this ban. So they would have been distributed to AT&T customers, in their stores, except for this ban. So maybe that was another element here was, oh shoot, they're about to get a foothold in one of the major carrier stores, and then everyone will actually see how awesome these phones are. Let's kill them now. But I think the 5G was also a pretty major piece. It's like, oh geez, we don't want China to own 5G infrastructure around the world. That's going to go everywhere. So could be a problem. All right, so let's move on to another story here. This is that Nest had been acquired by Google. It was another one of these acquisitions where, oh yeah, we'll let it be its own thing, haha, and they did for a long time. And now they're starting to pull the plug on that and, integrate it into the Google family. So this is a Creative Commons clip from twit.tv, This Week in Google 508, Nest Reborn.
This is Twit. Nest. Now, I really want Stacy's take on this because she covers IoT. Ron Amadio wrote an article that might be, I think, considered by some a little bit...
De trop?
Yeah.
He went a bit overboard.
Maybe he went a little bit overboard. So, in fact, Florence Ion said, I'm doing some research on this because I don't know if I buy it. He writes, Nest, the company, died at Google I/O 2019. The Nest ecosystem is dead. Nest accounts are dead. Nest privacy firewall is dead. You remember when Google acquired Nest, Tony Fadell famously said, don't worry, Google's not going to get your information. But there's also, of course, a Works with Nest program. And the Works with Nest program is going to be deprecated. In fact, here's the post on the Works with Nest site. It's winding down.
So here's what's going to happen. Google basically at Google I/O said it took Nest from a series of devices that have historically had their own intelligence and agency. So there was a direct API that lets you control them. It let Nest devices talk to your stuff and vice versa. By killing the Works with Nest program and switching it all through the Google Assistant and Google Home, what it's done is it's stuck the Google Home in as a middleman. So now think of the Nest devices as zombies. They are now controlled via the Google Home. And this is bad news for a lot of companies. It was sudden news for many companies. So every company out there that has done a Works with Nest integration now has to go back and basically build a routine through Google.
And that includes if this, then that.
It includes IFT. It includes Hue. It includes Lutron. It includes Amazon. Anybody who's been controlling their Amazon or their Nest thermostat through their Amazon Echo, Amazon has to work with Google now through this, and Amazon will get their own. It's not a skill; it's a routine or some sort of integration. So this isn't great. I mean, if you don't have a Google Home, you're going to be like, well, crap. Now I need some sort of home device from Google in my house to control my Nest devices.
You can't use your Android device, your Android phone?
Well, you can, but you can't do it when you're away because there's not a device there.
You need a hub at home. Okay, got it.
Yeah, that is my understanding. Now, I don't have my Nest stuff because I moved out, and so I've decommissioned all that. I can't play with this. Yeah. So if you're a person with Nest gear and you're like, what does this mean? Will I lose all functionality? You may lose some functionality. In June, you're going to be asked to switch over from a Nest account to a Google account. You shouldn't do that yet, though, because you have until the end of August.
August 31st, 2019.
And I would wait for the integrations that matter to you for those companies to actually announce that they've completed them and tested them, because otherwise you're going to kill functionality without being able to recreate it just yet.
That's not good.
Stacy, will you, presuming everybody goes through this, IFT will work again? These things will work again? They just, once they go through the effort?
Yes. Everybody has to go through this effort. And the reason why Google did this is because now it has greater control over what devices access your Nest gear. Beforehand, I was accessing my Nest gear through like IFT and Amazon and all of these other things. And I would sometimes stop those connections, and then other things would still try to, it was kind of a security challenge, and it's a privacy challenge. So in relation to this, Google actually announced a privacy program for their smart home sensor products. And I have a lot of thoughts on this, so we'll get into that next. But ask me any more questions about Works with Nest.
In general, is this a good and necessary thing or a greedy and horrible thing?
It's both.
Like life.
Like life. There's two. I mean, yes, it's going to allow Google you'll have one place to go for privacy information and to understand what devices have access to what data. Because beforehand, Google couldn't tell you who had access to your Nest thermostat. You went through Nest and some things still worked, some things didn't. It was all iffy, and Google couldn't control the ecosystem. The flip side is Google couldn't control the ecosystem. And a lot of people like that because they want to feel like they're in control of the ecosystem.
Got it.
What about privacy, though? Aren't some people concerned that now the firewall between Google and Nest is breached?
I mean, the fact that they had the firewall from the deal in 2013 when it was announced, or was it 2013 or 2014 that it closed?
I don't know.
So the fact that it's lived for this long is actually really impressive. And what Google's done is they're not using this. Okay, and here's where we get, and I wrote about this, so feel free to link to my story on Google's privacy thing. Google put out a privacy policy dedicated to sensor devices, and in it did some really great things. It said, hey, here's all of our devices. Here's all the sensors in it. Here's the data those sensors collect, which is something I think everything should do. And then it said, we're not going to use the data collected by those things for advertising. And it was very clear on this. Some of that data, all of the sensor home data, is not going to be used for advertising. Now, that's good. That's what a lot of people are worried about. It is not the end-all be-all because advertising is for the web, and this is the smart home. The data they're collecting is going to be valuable, not necessarily for advertising, although it could be used, like if they wanted to go
indirectly might be used for advertising too.
It doesn't matter.
Right? You know?
Advertising is not the big thing we need to worry about here. What we need to worry about is having algorithmically generated decisions made for us for prices we pay for goods, things like insurance, access to healthcare or access to services. And that Google isn't talking about at all in their privacy policy. They're just like, yeah, we're going to keep this data. We're not going to show it to other people, so we're not going to share it. We're not going to show you advertising based on it. So everyone's like, oh, good, dodged a bullet. But really, they're not saying that we're not going to use this to build services and products.
Right.
And those services and products could end up putting a consumer in kind of a bad spot.
Well, give us just one potential scenario.
So, let's say Google has all this information now about the devices in my home. They could come in and say, hey, would you like electricity service from us? We can use this data to provide a more competitive rate, which sounds really good. But then once they have that competitive rate, how are they going to behave? Does anyone else have that access to data? Can they offer a similar product?
We know when you're home. We know when you're not home.
Right.
And of course, we're going to save you money by turning down your AC.
So
in the
beginning,
you're cold-blooded.
Yeah.
Right. It creates the same sort of monopoly effect or duopoly possibly effect that like the cable and ISP providers have by virtue of owning the pipe. By owning access to our smart home data, if it's a single company who has that, they can build all kinds of competitive services on top of that no one else can touch. And that's one example. Another example might be Google could start like a healthcare brokerage, health insurance brokerage, and start.
Yeah. We have to stop thinking that the hazard is that these companies are going to share our private information with third parties, because that's one of the hazards, but it's not the only hazard.
And we have to stop thinking about the only hazard as being advertising. The web was built on advertising. We're building something that isn't the web. We're building the Internet of Things, and that is going to be you're going to have data-based services.
So
the hazard, let's be clear, is in the eye of the beholder. You may love your low-priced electric service. It's just a question of whether you are informed enough to make a good choice.
Yeah, you may love it until there is no other choice, and then they jack up the prices.
Yeah, there's that too.
The problem with monopoly is not that it doesn't provide great service, but that by virtue of having a monopoly, you eliminate the elasticity of supply and demand pricing.
The step before the monopoly, and you may never get to monopoly. What I think I hear Stacey saying is that it's not a question of a monopoly. It's a question of you live in an ecosystem where you have limited information. There may be 10 other competitors. You don't know about them.
Well, you have both limited information, and then they have built a wall of data basically around you that it becomes impossible to leave. It's kind of like what people are talking about when they're talking about regulating Facebook, and like they're talking about like
or
friend
Apple.
portability.
Apple's doing this too. Every company seems to be moving into this idea of siloing you and creating a walled garden that is, that works well.
Yes, it'll be wonderful. It'll be highly customized for you. There's benefits and drawbacks to that depending on how you feel about the world. But at the end of the day, it's a very dystopian vision, and I don't think we want that. I would like to keep the competitive the barrier to the
It's the same argument people give against the smart city that Google's building in Toronto. It's not that a smart city won't have better commute, better bus service, better electrical service. It's that it will all be owned by one company. You're suddenly in the company town.
Well, it's also what is Google going to do with that data, and how are they going to charge for access to that data for both cities and people and privacy and blah, blah, blah.
I, for one, am building an ark to take me to Google Island. 40 cubits by 80 cubits.
You might be there by default. You may not have much of a choice.
That's fine.
There's also a short-term pain point, which is that anybody who has configured an elaborate smart home, you're lucky, Stacey, you just took yours apart.
So you're going to have to reconfigure it.
You're going to have to start all over again, all your scripts, all your automated routines and everything. But the good news is they're pulling off the Band-Aid. Once you move into the nice warm embrace of the Google bath, you won't have to ever leave it.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show on KMUZ. That was a Creative Commons clip from twit.tv. That was This Week in Google 508, Nest Reborn. So yeah, Google I.O. with the announcement that the Nest ecosystem is going away and the accounts are going away. Some people were thinking, oh, Nest is dead. And others are like, no, it's being reborn as something else. So with integration, is speculated to be into the general Google Home as the new control hub for everything. And then for other companies to have to go through that API. As I said, it's sort of, I think the most striking phrase in there was the wall of data around you. And it's really about Google and anyone they choose to be a partner with, but generally Google itself, having a information advantage over anyone else that is trying to provide services to you, being able to instantly tell if someone else is getting traction in the home and being able to adjust their tactics to kill it in the cradle, any potential competitors, while those competitors don't have similar information about, what's going on with Google products. So when only one side in a fight has information about the other, that usually doesn't end well for the person who doesn't have the information access. Now, Nate, you don't like all the smart home stuff, right? All the IoT stuff.
No, I despise it.
Yeah,
with a passion. Like smart
cars and. Give you something, just a regular carburetor that you know how to fix.
That's because number one, I don't like the disposable technology.
Yeah.
That can't be repaired and just ends up in a trash pile somewhere. And everybody publicly states, that's, a politician and so on and so forth, that all this stuff is being appropriately recycled. It's not. It's ending up in sea crates in a third world country somewhere where some 5-year-old kid is burning it over a coffee can, with charcoal, trying to extract precious metals out of it.
What were you doing, Joey? Yeah. I was appropriately extracting materials.
Yeah, as someone who spent 25 years in the IT world, I've seen the flip side. I know what happens behind the scenes, and I know what all of the business people and politicians say on the front side in order to make everything palatable.
And by the way, I wonder a little bit if that is always going to stay with us, because potentially the nice side of one of these companies taking over the full ecosystem is now they're not just making money on the hardware. There's this planned obsolescence is not a hardware thing. It's a service thing, and you can have hardware that lasts forever and just keep adding new services to it.
you can if the hardware can accept it.
Yeah.
The other challenge you run into is like in the automotive industry, and this is why I don't like dealing with the newer stuff, because part of the process that those companies use in order to force your hand to adopt the newer sales, the sales of the newer models, is to either intentionally deactivate features on the model, and or intentionally stop making parts that cannot be reproduced by other means easily and cost effectively. So, for example, or legally. And so, for example, even though there were patents which have now expired on things like carburetors and various other fuel delivery devices and on the older style combustion engines, the reality is that you can take apart, even if it's broken, take it out to a skilled machine shop and they can remake it, and so that you can use it the way that it was before it was broken. Now, can you resell it? Well, that depends on whether or not there's still a patent on that product, but nonetheless, you can still fix it.
And or even 3D print it.
Right. Now, the problem with the newer electronically controlled systems is that oftentimes the microchips themselves are highly custom.
Yeah.
And those are opaque. If you don't have a high-tech fabrication facility, number one, that can make the microchip, that's already one check against you. And then number two, the highly proprietary binary coding that is on that chip, which is oftentimes not done in a standard language in order to make it more difficult to hack.
Well, sometimes it's even deliberately encrypted in a way that provides no functionality, but it invokes the DMCA, so it makes it illegal to replace it, like cryptographically integrating your printer ink cartridge.
Right. So this creates a potential outcome where you have a car with a perfectly fine running combustion engine, with the exception that the engine control electronic control module
refuses to use it.
It doesn't work, either because it was intentionally deactivated or it broke, and the company will not allow a replacement part to be sold. And this is their way of forcing the old models into the scrapyard. I would rather have a much older model that is still restorable, that can still be repaired, that I have full and complete total control over.
Yeah.
And even if it's less fuel efficient, and at least that way I know how to get it working if I have to get it working, rather than just being subjected to the whims of another company's financial bottom line, right?
And even just cutting that communication link is not necessarily a defense against abuse of or problems with the newer technology, because on the one side you have this stuff being rushed out the door in prototype mode,
right,
where it needs those continual updates just to not be subjugated or fail in some horrible way.
It's all half baked. So
you need to give the ability. You need to give them the ability to update stuff, and the ability to update stuff allows them to brick it.
My biggest concern with the stuff inside the home, though, is the invasion of privacy.
Yeah.
And time and time again, I mean, we always hear, well, we're not going to do that, and then we turn right around and 4 weeks later, we're like, yeah, they did that.
We're not going to do it until we feel like it.
Yeah.
That's just exactly the same way as when they acquire these companies. It's like, oh, we're going to keep this as its own thing. It's like, well, why did you buy it?
And I guess we've seen this over the past year, and stories come out about this, where you can have a conversation about something you haven't spoken about in months, and then you have this conversation about this particular topic, and all of a sudden
an ad pops up,
and then an ad pops up, meaning that something somewhere close to you was recording this conversation. And of course, there are always the conspiracy theorists, that are actively, pursuing this. Then there are those that say, no, it's purely coincidental. And then there's the pragmatic people down the middle, which are like, well, I didn't even talk about this for like 18 months. Why is it that I just had this discussion recently and all of a sudden something popped up? And
one of the things where this comes from, yes, it totally could be, them spying on you. I think it is instructive that in very few cases, I can't really think of any cases where intentional spying was going on that was caught. And I don't think these people are perfect at doing crimes.
Let me give you a really good example, because you weren't present for this, but this is so timely.
Okay.
I visited the McMiniman UFO Festival over the weekend, because that's what I like to do every single year.
Yeah,
and
I like to be there too.
I had the opportunity to listen to Bob Lazar.
Yep.
In the process of being interviewed, there were some top secret pieces of information. And he intentionally went out into like a field where there was nothing except their cell phones. And they had this discussion. And I'm not sure if they intentionally staged it that way, but a short time later, there was a raid on his place of work. Somebody was actively listening routinely to his phone to know what he was talking about.
Oh, yeah, okay, so we know that there are remote access Trojans, and we know that from Snowden that there's routine surveillance going on.
The point being is
so yeah, it could be if someone had a national. I mean, I would be surprised actually if someone who had any sort of national security, cursor blinking over his head wasn't being monitored,
surveilled on a routine
by his
basis.
coffee maker.
Right. So my point being is that technology is there. And it's actively
it can be converted
used
to that. Yes.
The real issue that all of these big companies and government agencies have is how much bandwidth and attention do we want to pay to everyone? How many people are truly worth studying? Because most people aren't really threats.
Yes.
Most people don't really have that much stuff in their lives that's really entertaining to us. There's a small handful of people that are high value targets.
Yeah, that to me has always been the thing. Like whenever I hear about the police and law enforcement in general complaining about the going dark problem, I was like, there's no going dark problem when you want to target somebody. The government will, that there's just, we have so many technologies at our disposal that if someone is the focus of an investigation and, all the legal gloves are off, as they often are behind the scenes, then, they're going to get what they're going to get. That's not a problem. The threat, I think, to society in the large is having surveillance that is cheap, legal, and invisible. And that's the thing that law enforcement is usually actually arguing for when they're complaining about going dark. It's like, wow, I can't surveil millions of people from my desk with the push of a button and no one knows, and no one even in my agency needs to know that I'm doing it. I just want it, so turnkey that it's easy to do when no one's looking, so to speak. So that's what I'm against, because they don't need all these legal backdoors because they have plenty of illegal ones when they need to use them. And they have plenty of manpower and tech, even for, if they want to, do it legally and above board, that they can still get everything that they need. So I think that when you talk about, two people having, have no security implications going on in their lives, and we were talking about something in the kitchen and then we saw an ad for it. I think that's a little bit of confirmation bias there.
You know what?
Let me just finish this. So I think it's a little confirmation bias where it's like all the people had a conversation in their kitchen and no ad popped up. You don't hear from them. You only hear from the person for which it was unusual. And there's also lots of stuff going on with, like the same thing with those when they were when they were watching people's shopping habits, and the computer was determining, if you buy this and this, then you're probably pregnant, and they're sending out, baby products to someone who hadn't told anyone or maybe even knew that she was pregnant. So that was, there's that kind of thing going on where these correlation engines might, given all the vast number of data coming into it, know that you were going to talk about this or that this was going to come up, even if you don't see where they could have gotten that from. There's plenty of clues out there, I think, in a lot of cases. So I think most of these stories we hear is a combination of one of those two. And there's also individual hackers out there, with their, remote access Trojans and making stuff happen, because I think there's enough pranksters out there and it's easy enough to hack that's happening too.
So what I was snickering about was the counter argument, which is, what? You think we're going to surveil you? You aren't even worth the electricity that we have to spend to try to get out of you the worthless information.
Yeah. Well, in a lot of cases, it's like, okay, if we surveil at this level of closeness more than X number of people, what's the percentage chance that this will come out? It'll cause some scandal. It'll cause the bad guys we're after to be more paranoid, and it will give us a black eye with everyone else.
The government and surveillance aside, there's still an issue with devices just malfunctioning and or settings set to have these things relay information to like your contact list, right? So there was a time when I was driving a car and my phone auto dial. I don't know if I hit it or just what happened. Then I called somebody. I didn't even
version of the butt dial.
I didn't even know that they were on the phone. Of course, somebody cut me off. It was a bicyclist, and I was just on this tirade in the car about this bicyclist who was not obeying road traffic, who just darn near caused an accident. And fortunately, I had the window up and the door shut because most people didn't want to hear what I was saying about this person who clearly had no concept of the frustration they were causing to other people. I have nothing against bicyclists. I have something against bicyclists who believe that they don't have to follow rules of the road. Those are the bicyclists that bother me. And justifiably, motorists have a legitimate argument against these types of bad actors who give all bicyclists a bad name.
Yeah.
All right, I'm off my little soapbox there. Nonetheless, the person, fortunately, hung up, called me back and said, hey, I just heard this really awesome rant, but I just want to let you know that your phone called me, and I don't think you meant to do that.
That's that's an interesting call to get.
Yeah,
I've been on the receiving end of that, where I've gotten a call and it's obviously, someone's butt dialed me and it's just an open channel and I'm hearing movement and I'm hearing doors slam and stuff like that, and I'm like, all right, I'm just trying to figure out who it is in some cases. And it was coming in where I didn't have a caller ID.
Apparently, more recently, the Amazon Echo was, it triggered off by some word sequence and notified this person's entire contact list of something. I don't know. Well,
not one entire contact list. It was one person. Essentially, what it did is it thought it heard. Yeah, one of the features it has is you can open up a channel to someone else with an Echo. And if they're on your contact list, it's like command word, call Joe, and then it just opens up a channel. And there's several confirmation messages that are coming back. Now, in this case, the Echo was turned down enough or muted so that they did not hear any of those confirmations. And so it thought it heard the wake up word, and then it thought it heard a confirmation, and so it opened up the channel. I think it was actually 2 or 3 or 4 menus it had to go through. So it was a fairly unusual chain of events. But, the voice recognition isn't completely there yet. And I think that was a couple up in Portland, actually, that had that. And their friend called them and said, by the way, your system just, in that case, he said, I think your Echo has been hacked because, I just heard this conversation you were having in it. And, the word from Amazon, I think it's credible, was, it's just a really unlikely series of, things that sounded like commands and them not hearing the prompts from the Echo to know what was going on. Well, one more thing before we go. I'll just throw out a quick clip to finish things out here. This is from a clip from twit.tv, Triangulation 394, talking about a lot of people were kind of upset, what's going to happen with Apple now that Steve Jobs is gone, and there's that talk echoes down the road quite a ways, and so here's just the very little known Tim Cook, talking about okay, what actually is he bringing? This isn't just some guy. This is actually a substantial person. So, Triangulation 394.
This is Twit. People always think, okay, well, the Apple Pencil would never have been charged outside of the iPad if, Jobs were alive, or all these things about products. But I really wonder what would have happened if he had still been around in terms of this, because you write about in the book about how Cook worked with the Fair Labor Association. He was the first tech company to do that. And they audited the factories, and they did make a lot of changes. And what if, how would Jobs have fared now in the age of social media? You think about Elon Musk and, Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, and where would he have fallen in that? And because by all accounts, he kind of said whatever he felt like saying all the time, and people don't accept that so much anymore.
Well, Steve Jobs, he's very disciplined, and I think he's the opposite of someone like Elon Musk. Jobs is never going to, take to his Twitter stream and start spouting, whatever came off the top of his head. He was much more disciplined.
But how do we know he didn't use Twitter? Really? Did he? I guess.
Well, Twitter was around. Social media's been around for a while. And if you look at, Jobs only came out, his keynotes were really his forum. for speaking to the public, and he would practice for months obsessively. Every single slide, was pored over and agonized over. He didn't do anything off the cuff. I mean, he hardly even made any jokes that weren't rehearsed, in his product presentations. But the point about would he have cared about these issues? No, I don't think so. I think this is what's interesting about Tim Cook, and this is why he's one of the most important CEOs, if not the most important CEO that Apple's ever had, is because he's bringing these values and changing this massive corporation that I think was indifferent to these things. It was indifferent to the supply chain. It didn't, like Jobs, I think, was mortified that 12 people committed suicide and would loved how to he'd loved that issue to have gone to bed. Like, he did not like dealing with that and did not know how to deal with it and didn't deal with it. They made some changes, but the big changes didn't really come until after Jobs passed and Tim Cook took over. And then he really got serious about, enforcing Apple's supplier code of conduct, holding the suppliers' feet to the fire, cutting them off if they made too many infractions. They really got serious under Tim Cook, and it wasn't under Steve Jobs. He's making Apple a very, very progressive company. And he's doing all the things that I think people used to project onto Steve Jobs. I mean, Steve Jobs was like a hippie, he's California hippie, long hair, super good looking. He dated rock stars, he was had weird diets. He seemed to be the epitome of, the sort of like California left coast cool. And yet the company he founded and ran was, it was like a big, really kind of ruthless money-making machine. And it really didn't do much for the environment or for, inclusion, diversity, education, the supply chain. And these are things that have really changed under Tim Cook, the last few years, quietly and really quite remarkably. He has been turning Apple into this vessel for making some quite important changes, I think, in the way that American, people, that companies like as big as Apple do business and do things like make products. They're running on 100% renewable power is big and important. I think a really big and important change.
And you're listening to Northwest Tech Show. That was a Creative Commons clip from the good folks at Twit.tv, Triangulation 394. Just a couple of insights into Tim Cook. That he's actually sort of executing on some of the through the company, some of the traits that Jobs seemed to embody and that people liked him for. And with that, you've done it again. You spent an hour talking about technology with Dave and Nate. I hope you'll join us next Wednesday and every Wednesday, noon to 1 o'clock, to continue this conversation on Northwest Tech Show.